All right, and we're live. Mac, how
Woo!
you doing today? Woo, woo.
Doing good. I am double fisting it today. I've got my Red Bull, and then I've got my cocktail, which isn't really a cocktail.
What's the
It's
cocktail today?
That's Woodford Reserve because it's our last
Oh,
call, right? Like it's
it's one of the
certainly
days.
happy hour in Idaho. I mean, it's happy hour whenever you decide, but
That's true. And Jimmy Buffett did say it best, right? It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
yeah, yeah. Maybe in the London office, they're closer
Exactly.
to their time.
Well, hey everyone. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, Mac and I here, just drop in the chat just so we know it's working. Where are you joining us from today? And perhaps what's in your cup?
What's in your
Mac's got a
cup?
nice Woodford Reserve. I actually have a an IPA here as well. Pretty excited
Oh,
about it. From a brewery in Ontario, if there's any Canadians on the call.
I feel like if there's a Canadian on the call, they automatically win the raffle.
Yeah, that they're like, okay, cool, I got it. So we got an Idaho here, we got a Waterloo, Canada here.
Well, people are slowly trickling in.
We're probably just mixing a drink, that's my guess.
I'd hope so. Or their Uber Eats didn't show up like mine. Been on the
Oh
call
no.
all day. I know, and I had to cancel it because I was like, this is treason. Like this is traitor work right now. I never got my burrito, so I'm just surviving on Red Bull.
Well, we got a hi here from Minneapolis. Hi, Sinet from Minneapolis.
Woo! We've got some good topics today. I'm really excited about
I'm
this one.
pretty excited. Well, why don't we get into it? You want to get into it? Should we get into it, Mac? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, what time is it? It's been a minute. I think we got nine people. 10. It's going. It's coming in. They're trickling in.
Trickling
Yeah,
in.
we can go ahead and kick it off.
Well, excellent. For those who are just kind of coming into the webinar here, welcome. And why not drop a into the chat here where you're joining us from and potentially what's even in your cup today as you're joining the Last Call Threat Intel webinar that Mac and I will be chatting about today. This is part of a series. We're doing this monthly. We're calling it Last Call Threat Intel, and it's really just meant to be a couple of security folks in a virtual pub exploring what's going on in the market from both a cyber threat intelligence perspective and what we're seeing in our threat intelligence group, our PsyOps team that Mac leads. So as we get going here, again, drop any questions you have in the Q&A. Let us know where you're from, where you're joining us from, what you're enjoying potentially in your cup today. We've got some nice new glassware as well that is going to be a bit of a metaphor for some of the things that we're talking about today. As you can maybe
How many
imagine.
puns have you prepared?
I've
Matt,
got a
fun
few up
fact.
my sleeve. I got a few. That's the nice thing about security and really being in a pub is there's no shortage of puns. So we're going to be applying that today. Um, but if you attended the last one we did in March, the threat last call threat intel briefing, you'll know that we don't have a set of formal slides here. This is something that we really want to put the focus on giving you real intelligence, actionable advice, and what we're seeing in the wild and through our security operations center and our PsyOps team. So my co-bartender today, as always, is Mac Brown, our VP of PsyOps Threat Intelligence. Mac, say hello. What's in your cup?
Hello. Happy to be here. I've got, as Matt mentioned, I've got some nice Woodford in my cup. I'm a bourbon girl,
Big fan.
Idaho, really, born and bred. A little bit of Colorado lately, though, to be honest. I'm all over the place. And I've got Red Bull because I didn't think I was hyper enough and I needed a little pick me up. So these don't go well together, by the way. These taste absolutely. I just poured them. I'm like, ugh, like orange juice and toothpaste.
I have never tried that.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
So
super
I'll talk
excited.
a little around what's on tap today as well. So we're going to be talking about some new AI powered glassware, if you will. It's being used for high severity software vulnerabilities to find and fix them. We'll also get into some PCP, but not that kind of party. We'll be putting a spotlight on the threat actor group that's weaponizing the VECT ransomware. And we've also got a double IPA that our teams are serving up from an old microbrewery out of Redmond, Washington, if you can put that together. And that one's actually called Vishing. So we're going to leave off with some emerging styles that Mac's PsyOps team is seeing and give you some tangible things that you can take away to bolster your defenses. But Mac, why don't we get into that new glassware? Let's break it down. Break the new glassware. What do you think?
I like it. I'm gonna guess it's about Glasswing. Am I right?
Oh, you would be
Shocker.
absolutely correct.
Shocker. It's still a really hot topic right now, and so we felt like it was relevant. But it's not even the Glasswing itself topic and the discoveries that we'll talk about, but it's all of the things in the news that we've been seeing after the fact. I mean, last week itself, we just had a reported incident response investigation. We're pulling it apart and doing some analysis right now. And oh, I had mentioned this to you, Matt. It was all about we see a lot of LLM being used in attack
Right.
methodologies. And this one was specifically used for creating the lure page and a C2 beacon.
Wow.
So AI on the conversation of how it's used maliciously has been happening. But Project Glasswing, I mean, this came out and obviously is a wake-up call. Thankfully, it's very closed in by the amount of participants, from what I understand.
Hmm.
But it had some scary things tied to it, or I guess
Yeah, something.
revelations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that really stands out for me on this too is in the past few weeks, we've even seen related to this, the time to exploit actually collapse, right? If you're following the 0 day clock, the time
We
it
have,
takes for a vulnerability to go to to a confirmed exploitation is hours. It's 10 hours now. So
yeah.
and we're seeing that defenders, that what it means for defenders is that now you've got even less time to respond. It's almost guaranteeing that an exploitation has occurred somewhere in the environment. And I feel like we've gone from breaches being not a condition of if, but when to now assume breach and assume it's happening now.
Right, absolutely. And certainly on the whole vast of topics we're going to cover today too is like you said, that dwell time. And I think that's what this Project Glasswing or the Mythos actually brought out was how quickly once it was in operation it detected thousands of vulnerabilities, right? Like one was the OpenBSD vulnerability that's 27 years old.
It's crazy.
It's absolutely crazy. And it basically like the way they mention it, you send a couple bits of data to a server and it absolutely crashes it. And so I'm sure that's one of many vulnerabilities. And I think that's the frightening thing is how many vulnerabilities, how many unknown unknowns has it detected in legacy, traditional based security systems and services, let alone architecture. And
Yeah.
so it's nice that it's been doing that. Um, I think the thing that I'm most concerned about that it sheds light on a little bit is its ability to also chain exploits together.
Right.
A lot of people have been talking about Blue Hammer and Red Sun, the other three that are all together, and they're Windows-based exploits. And that was the conversation we had internally is like, what is the criticality of it? And we're like, well, just to be able to exploit like Windows Defender Updater and get access, and it's all on the endpoint, they're like, they still have to chain multiple techniques to it.
Yeah.
And Glasswing, this project specifically has the ability to chain exploits, chain vulnerabilities, and that might be beneficial to us. But in the wrong hands, obviously, would probably be extremely dangerous and scary.
Yeah, and the couple models that we're talking about here specifically, I mean, there's a few of them that have joined sort of this concept and are using GPTs and these models for cybersecurity and spotting vulnerabilities, but specifically Anthropic's Mythos update as well, the new model there, and really the OpenAI GPT-5 Cyber. Those two specifically, and I was reading a little bit about Mythos, and it was really interesting to me that Mythos was designed to be good at code. And as a result of being good at code, it inherently became good at cybersecurity, which is really interesting to me because you think about how it's now able to look at any operating system and find latent vulnerabilities in that code and improve them, stop them, block them, patch them, make them better. And that's something that I think is really interesting, and that it being able to identify thousands of these 0 day vulnerabilities in a matter of weeks.
Right. It's absolutely a wake-up call. I think too, we're still having the conversation about exploitability of which vulnerabilities matter. And so a lot of the headlines are focusing on, the thousands of these, and it can respectively be overwhelming of the amount of vulnerabilities that we're now having to deal with, potentially. But I think it's how are we filtering it down to the vulnerabilities that are actually utilized for exploitation to get initial access into an environment, to perform privilege escalation, to do the things that they need to do quickly and effectively, or chaining multiple exploits together to be able to accomplish that. I think all of the news we're seeing, right? We saw the MCP, the
Right.
Model Context Protocol vulnerability is a new one that came out last week. They're discussing for tools being able to use to create these massive mother of all supply chain based attacks. The Versal breach for context AI, like kind of bringing light to the shadow AI conversation we've been having that's concerning for us and all of our partners as well. And then, like you said, the GPT 5.4 release. I think all of these kind of going hand in hand. This has only been a couple weeks since Glasswing was announced, and it feels like we're in full throttle. You know,
Right.
Fast and the Furious 8. Actually, there might already be an
Mm.
8.
Yeah. What number are we on with that now? It's a good question.
But that's the conversations we're having, and most of the things that we're seeing in the news is too like things that are like, look what these AI advancements have brought us, but also look, I guess in my mind, I'm always thinking backwards of how can these tools be used maliciously? Or are we behind the race
Right.
right now, right? This was, we used to be in cybersecurity, a race for human wits and being able to create these sophisticated attack chains from the threat actor side, but then we have to turn around and defend against them. But now it's an arms race for automation, scalability, efficiency, and that's what a lot of these tools have brought in. So
And
Glasswing
and
being able to show all this light, shed light on vulnerabilities is terrifying because it looks that we're pretty far behind.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, scale and all of those things. I think the other big piece is speed, right? With the speed at which these models are evolving and changing literally every day, we're starting to see zero day exploits that are becoming 0 hour now and soon to be 0 minute. And
Right.
what happens when they're in real time? Like you mentioned, it's going to be an arms race. And I think these models help to level up the playing field for defenders. But you mentioned earlier, if they're in the wrong hands, it can also accelerate threat actors and how they're deploying their tactics as well.
Right. And I think it matches too of what we're seeing with a lot of these LLM models and on the vulnerability conversation, but not just, but just general AI tooling used maliciously. We'll talk a little bit about the Team PCP activities,
Hmm.
but I think what this project is showing is a massive bingo card check of supply chain attacks that we're going to see in the future. We're seeing a bunch of supply chain attacks right now already, but this is looking for weaknesses or flaws within existing software. And so we're thinking about supply chain attacks on the Team PCP that we'll kind of discuss here shortly is they're going to focus on ways to create exploits in things that developers are using, tools or systems that developers use to implant other types of malware. And I feel like AI is only going to contribute to this even further, being able
Yeah,
to scan and discover and give them
absolutely.
opportunity.
And I think it's a really good one. I mean, you mentioned Fast and Furious. I think it's a good opportunity for us to shift gears into another threat actor group that's, you mentioned weaponizing some of these cloud control planes and how they're executing on the supply chain attacks as well and using vector ransomware. And that's Team PCP. And, so we'll take a little look here at, Team PCP and see what they're doing here as well. But, how they're leveraging vector ransomware, I think is very interesting. And this is a group that, is financially motivated across gaining notoriety in March, but also they've been the ones behind some of the most significant open source supply chain attacks that have been out there, targeting specifically those developer pipelines, the CI/CD pipelines, and other dev tools to steal credentials and deploy their ransomware. And it's gone by a number of different groups, but what kind of strikes you with Team PCP that we're seeing as a threat actor group, Mac, and potentially even how they're leveraging the Vect ransomware to deploy those attacks?
Well, yes. So first and foremost, on the CI/CD pipelines, what their strategy has been not attacking the production systems themselves, like we would see historically, but they're poisoning the well. So they're looking at tools like Trivy, I believe is the one. Yes, Trivy, which is like an open source vulnerability scanner tool and misconfiguration scanning tool. So like a multi-tool for security that's utilized in either by developers or in automated fashion. And they went in and actually poisoned that said tool in order to have it create the ability to implant malware into the system or into the code itself. So a good old fashioned, because I'm drinking Woodford, a good old fashioned. Uh,
You got the puns too.
I
Look at
got my
that.
puns. Sometimes they come out. I didn't realize it.
Not just
But
me.
basically, it's like, they're like, instead of targeting production systems that are going to require a lot more reconnaissance and actually infiltration of an environment, we're just going to look for one thing that's going to be a single binary that's ran quickly, efficiently, and fast, and often automatically put in some automation workflows. So they did that and it successfully poisoned many versions of tools like Trivy in order to execute malware that essentially harvest things from their Azure AWS keys, Kubernetes tokens, SSH keys, basically all the secrets that are typically hijacked or stolen. So really successful. I think it's really like it opens up this whole initial access, almost initial access brokerage, I would argue, for the way that they are creating many opportunities through one technique or tactic. So initial access brokerage meets a good old fashioned supply chain romance. We met in a bar, meet cute. So I find it fascinating. And like you said, how it involves with VECT ransomware. Well, it really came to this threesome in a bar now. Between the you have basically the three players. So you have Team PCP. It sounds like every time I say that, I feel like I'm narrating a cops episode. Teams PCP, that's the access layer, right? That's providing initial access in a sense because they're doing the supply chain attack to
Mhm.
create many opportunities. VECT is the monetization layer. They're the ransomware as a service group. They operate in a double extortion model. They were really emerging or getting popular last August. So they've been working together in addition to breach forums. And yes, I know Matt and I have discussed this previously that like breach forums was taken down, but now it's
Mhm.
back. There's affiliate pages. There's probably some undercover cop pages because duh, given the first time this happened. So, but they have worked with forums, which is essentially like the audience layer. Like they're the recruitment tool essentially, and the announcement tool, the communications platform. And so the three of them have essentially created this alliance of cybercrime that's been really effective. And so I look at things like Team PCP. They're allegedly named after a group of young hackers, young adults, probably not in rollerblades and leather trench coats like Matt would think.
Bonus
But
points if you know the name of that movie.
yeah, seriously, bonus one. We should, yeah. We need to start doing it Easter eggs, and then if people give
Absolutely.
us three Easter eggs, we're gonna give you a free pair of socks. That's usually what they give out at conferences, so I'm sure we can send you some socks. I'm sure you'd rather have a bottle of anything else. So yeah, I think it's interesting. It reminds me of the business model. I think that's the biggest takeaway when we talk about threat actors like Team PCP. I feel like I have to say it that way when we talk about these threat actors, it's really examining the shift in the business model for these threat actor groups that start to build like the cartel model. We talked about it in the Echo report of last year, the cyber cartel, where a lot of ransomware operation services have worked together. Historically, like I've said, we've seen a lot of initial access brokerages in the past that became like a really good keyword, that buzzword, not even a buzzword, it's just like a new keyword that we were talking about in the industry. And now we're just seeing as they have a much more collaborative and organized business model working together. And so you think of supply chain attacks, typically what's going to happen is we're not going to see, they could lay dormant. And
Right.
there's going to be that dwell time just on the back end of if they're working together with really popular ransomware as a service groups, who else are they going to start working with?
Yeah, yeah. So would you say like as far as Team PCP, it is fun to say, you're right. As far as Team PCP goes, what are we seeing? What is your team seeing in PsyOps that, our own SOC, as far as this threat goes, what are some of the early indications or indicators of compromise that we're seeing here with this threat?
I mean, what we would look for from this side, outside of looking at the CI/CD pipeline issue, the supply chain issue, keeping tabs on dev tools that are used, GitHub pages, things that, we should be monitoring because I mean, just talking about Glasswing, we're no longer in a by design type of world.
Right.
Unfortunately, design is being targeted and successfully so. And especially when we look at the way that we've automated much of our development structure and processes. So, unfortunately, I think when you look at that component of this attack vector, outside of the open source tools that are utilized, credential theft that occurs and how we're doing zero trust modeling and identity and access, that's one aspect. And then looking at general, like what we look at for VECT ransomware, the types of techniques that come post compromise or post exploit. So when they get access, what are the things that the ransomware group itself, because they're double extortion, obviously they're going to look for data to exfiltrate, extort. But you're going to see very much of the classic ransomware operations of TTPs that occur across the board. For VECT specifically, it probably varies.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, we'll kind of get into the next threat I think that we're seeing, and that's the IPA from the old microbrewery in Redmond, Washington.
Yeah.
And this beer is actually called Vishing. So for this one here, this is something that we've seen an increase in this TTP specifically, but it's kind of a trend that Microsoft, the abuse of Teams through vishing practices, et cetera, is something we're seeing an increase in. Could you talk a little bit, Mac, about maybe what that means for folks in terms of how it's actually happening, how they're impersonating IT support, and to gain access to the Microsoft stack to kind of start to move laterally?
Well, unfortunately, it's not very sophisticated. And I think one takeaway we get from this type of campaign um, is that we need to evolve our security awareness training massively for some of these techniques because they do a really good job at mimicking and then going into next steps. So we have seen on the PSYOP side, we did see a big bump last year. Of course, this type of Teams abuse in general has been going on for several years. But there's no different than looking at some of the compromising activities against Slack or Zoom, even as we're on Zoom. And I know I was cursing at Zoom a second ago. So to keep that in mind, like the abuse itself. And even Matt, you and I, months ago, we had that other look back conversation
Hmm.
webinar where we talked about the MGM hack. So just the techniques of creating legitimacy or both urgency, impersonation of legitimacy, like all of those core themes of making the end user feel very let down their guard. And that's really the goal with the team's vishing here. So, it's exploiting that user trust. In a lot of the cases, in most of the cases we've seen in the attack chain, we see a lot of email bombing. So what they'll do, and these are again legitimate emails, they include like password reset, things that are like seem convincing, but an end user may be like, am I getting hacked? Like maybe someone has got my email and this is normal. So they do a bunch of email bombing in the inbox. So it happens abruptly and it gets their attention. And again, their guards let down. A lot of these threat actors then will reach out and they'll establish connection. They favor using like legitimate Microsoft subdomains. So they'll look for using some of their display names, which all these IOCs are out there. Honestly, every single person has reported on this because this is a known campaign trend because it's working very well. So they'll use all the normal display names, IT support, help desk, assistance. There's probably like 10 different variations out there. They'll have the subdomain, so on.microsoft.com, but they'll include some sort of IT support, some corporate name, right? Anything to make it look legitimate. And depending how you have your teams configured, of course, they wouldn't be able to see that it's an external user. So once they basically establish contact, they have a conversation saying, "We're here to fix your email. We saw this." Of course, the end user's like, "Oh shit, yeah, like I did see this in my inbox. This is a lot." That will convince them to install what we usually see as Quick Assist. There's also cases of AnyDesk we've seen. I'm sure there's other ones too, but Quick Assist is a lot easier since it's built into Windows. So they typically will like lean into that. That's more successful. They don't actually have to install any other download. Then the attacker will essentially perform execution of backdoors, DLL side loading, or execution of malicious files that will then implant backdoors, and then establish persistence. So among all of that, the most interesting data point I could find on this, I think is interesting, context-wise, is from that conversation to compromise of the end host system is roughly on average 3 minutes. So that
Three
is
minutes?
3 minutes, right?
That's
That's
it's like
like
no time. You can't even order another drink in 3 minutes.
no, yeah, yeah, exactly. Got to keep with the theme here. Yeah. 3 minutes until last call. Legitimately, I think that's a really interesting case. I will bring up one case that we did on incident response, well, specific investigation. And it started with the Teams Vishing, everything I just mentioned, right? Teams Vishing, DLL sideloading, quick assist, blah, blah, blah. Then they were dormant. We also saw some spoofed IPs, multiple IPs in the course of this very long attack timeline. Then we see dormancy for about like 2 weeks before we saw an initial detection, which, yes, we do have detections on DLL side loading. This is really common. However, for whatever reason, nothing was going off for this particular case. So I mean, this is pretty normal. They're evolving some of their techniques. What I find more interesting is the dormant side of it. So you have 2 weeks, and then the initial detection that came up that was most suspicious was the creation of scheduled tasks. Then that quickly moved into a creation of scheduled tasks to targeting a subset of systems. It ended up being the Payout Kings ransomware variant that did the encryption. And they're pretty popular. If you look at the Payout Kings, they have their own forum site and they have a ton of victims on it. Whether or not some of those victims are legitimate anymore or not, I can't say accuracy is always believable sometimes of their targets. Either way, most of them they are pretty accurate and the data is right there for you to purchase and download. So I find it interesting because there's not a lot of reports, just Microsoft did in the back kind of report on this that the Teams vishing itself, there are cases where this could be, I would suspect, an initial access brokerage type of opportunity, right? They get in, they have the target, they establish persistence through the back door, depending how loud they are, depending on the target, and then they sell that access later on. And that gives them time to do a lot more discovery or sell it off to a ransomware operation service where they're like, thank you, we'll pay the fee. I mean, what we're just talking about, Team PCP and VECT ransomware. We
Yeah.
see a lot more of this affiliation and partnerships going on where I think we're going to see more of these supply chain attacks, more of these successful initial access methodologies leading to ransomware as an operation. They're just going to wait until some of these come to light, purchase access, and then they'll be able to commit the rest of their TTPs as they know successfully will be designed. So, thankfully, this case was able to be resolved and it wasn't a mass encryption and everything, but yeah, I still find it really interesting that this particular campaign has been very noisy for the past 6 months and it's probably it's going to shift, it's going to evolve, but it's going to keep going.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I mean, this is a relatively older tactic, right? The whole vishing, the concept of vishing and using teams, et cetera, is not really new. It's not novel. And we chatted earlier about Glasswing and how there was a 27-year-old vulnerability in OpenBSD that was discovered and now could be weaponized. I think it's always the path of least resistance here in,
Yeah.
getting to an exploitation or actually an attack as well in those tactics. But what are some questions that folks should either ask their teams, their organizations? Like, how do we help them become more, harden their security posture against this type of threat, even though it's been around for years? What are some of the questions that they could ask?
I mean, obviously do an audit of your team settings, specifically like external access settings. Like that's the easiest one. For instance, if I'm on a call with a partner, it's very clear it's an external conversation going on. Everything's labeled. There's also allow listing you can do. So you can lock down teams. I think just most people don't in many cases because they just think, well, why would teams be targeted? Well, everyone has Copilot now, and that's Teams actually scares me. It scares the crap out of me nowadays. For how much data you could get just from owning something like that. A lot of concerns too on the Teams access. If they're already able to get your legitimate credentials, perhaps they've already performed some sort of hijacking of sessions and have tokens that they can reuse. They're going to access OneDrive, SharePoint, right? They're going to start looking into your emails. So um, there's probably multiple opportunities of the pathway. So always keep that in consideration. But first and foremost, reviewing, locking down external settings for your team's environment. And then I like to ask the question on just any communications platform, but like these types of techniques, how have you gone back and looked at your security awareness training? It's
Right.
not my favorite
That's a good one.
topic to talk about, but SAT's a thing. I scored poorly on mine, just kidding. But no, like security awareness training is actually something that I've witnessed many in my lifetime where I'm like go through my security awareness training every year and I'm like this is not I mean it's valuable. It's getting done, but start looking past the check mark. And I'm hoping that
Hmm.
people need to evolve, enhance, upgrade their security awareness training. Or if you're out there shopping for one, keep some of these new techniques and methods in mind on a list and be like, how do you guys train our end users to spot things? Especially when phishing is still widely used.
Hmm.
Definitely one of the most popular. Phishing is not going away anytime soon. The sophistication and accuracy of phishing has gotten better because of AI. So doing vishing is not going to change. I mean, if you can bring down the MGM with it, anybody is susceptible. So looking at security awareness training and like really having a culture shift, I think is important. And then, last thing I would say, because the most common thing in this campaign that we've seen are very normal living off the land techniques of legitimate apps that are used. So Quick Assist can be one of them. We saw AnyDesk too. We talk about this a lot. Any of those. Um, a managed application control solution, or just going through and auditing and allow listing what apps can be executed, or creating some sort of trigger for alerting if that requires validation, if there's an attempted install, right? Like that's probably the third layer that you would absolutely want. You should be doing that in for a lot of the campaigns that we talk about on these calls, but I mean, definitely having some sort of application control because they're not going to be, granted, they did install a backdoor, but and DLL sideloading for, I'm sure they're looking to obfuscate even more, but any desk quick assist, usually a good sign.
Yeah, there's a for me when you were talking around that as well, there's a big piece around vigilance, especially with security awareness training. Like nobody likes doing that, but I think it's more about culturally getting everyone across the company, the organization to just, be vigilant on these types of things. Like if it
Right.
seems weird, don't click on it. Like it sounds simple, but these tactics they work, and that's why we're talking about them today. And we're going to get into a couple emerging threats as well, because on this theme of what's old is new again, some OBGs, right? Oldie but goodies. There's a couple of threats to continue to watch, and that what we're seeing that might have been older. And we look at some of the emerging, concepts here, but our PsyOps team is starting to see some of these inbox rule abuse, situations start to proliferate.
So
And for me,
common.
right? And I think about
Yeah.
this like it's always it's path of least resistance, yes, but it's also where is the most valuable data, and your inbox holds the keys to that data, to the information, to the access to your company. Uh, we see that over 90% of cyber attacks are initiated via phishing. So we just talked about vishing. Now we're talking about phishing, and business email compromises are alive and well, right? I think that's something that you and I had talked about earlier. But let's maybe break this down for the folks on the inbox rule abuse technique. Like, why does this work even after password reset or MFA reset, and really what it is? Break it down for us, Mac. Break it down.
Yeah, break it down. Break it here. So this is a post-compromise technique, right? Once they're able to gain access in general, compromise the account. And I like to think that this is so I feel like a lot of people's mindset is why the heck would anyone want to look at my email inbox, depending on who you are in your role. But just to remind, like everything is an opportunity, even for internal to internal social engineering. But it is also important they are targeting like what we typically see as high profile roles. So we're talking about C-suite, finance, general counsel, your ex. Like they're looking for those high profile types of accounts because people actually share a lot of things in emails, whether it's links. And again, like I was talking about earlier, even on the Teams account, a lot of these can bleed into access of things like SharePoint, OneDrive, other connected applications. So once they have that access, once they've stolen those tokens, once they have your credentials, they're going to perform mailbox delegations. That's another really good sign that you have your inbox is compromised. But email inbox rules provide persistence. So they're basically going to control the flow of where mail is going. So if they've targeted your CFO and they're looking for what we always see in the business email compromise world is wire transfers, of course. That's going to be really the most common is it's monetization. How are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck as quickly as possible without having to do much actual hacking, more social engineering? But what they want to do is be able to do discovery in the inbox, looking for keywords. And then once they've found kind of, right, they want to establish what is considered normal for keywords internally. Then those are the words that they're going to establish rules on that are going to immediately move those emails into other obscure locations.
Hmm.
The most common ones, RSS feeds. Once they set up rules for that, that also gives them an opportunity to perform deletion as they're doing their responses. Any sort of interaction, all those replies, all of that is going to be hidden away so that the end user has no idea. Because how often are you looking through those folders, Matt?
Right.
Are you
Uh,
inspecting your? I still have like 20 emails I haven't read from this morning. I actually have days worth that I
and
haven't read.
RSS feeds, that's something I would never check.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
exactly.
it's definitely not. And so once it's a persistence mechanism. Once it's set, it allows them even after password change and everything. And we see a lot of forwarding where they'll forward the emails out to some Proton account. So that's still a traditional method that's
Mhm.
working. It allows them to bypass a lot of features, but in many cases, it's they're looking for the quickest payday. So we wrote an entire blog on this of some of the recent cases we've seen because there are detections that you can build out. Usually from if you do like multi-event analysis of identity-based investigations, like that's kind of a red flag in conjunction with other types of auditing rules, right? Like looking for new inbox rules, mail delegation, um, uh, paired with impossible travel or
Mm.
suspicious sign in of some sort, looking at the user agent strings, right? All of those together from an analysis perspective are like, hey, this person is compromised, and then working back from there. I will argue I've seen a few BECs way back in the day, back in state government days, that the wire transfer, once it was gone, is quite quick. There are a lot of methods where you can block it, stop it, but shockingly, people don't do validation processes from a business ops side. But they still get through. I'm more concerned with the data discovery. They target these high profile people. They get
Yeah.
access to M365, then they're going to look for other data they know.
Yeah, and those are folks that hold like approval authority, right? So if you're looking for those keywords of transaction or invoice or et cetera, billing, they're looking for those and they're going to target the high value people that are usually making those decisions or at least have the authority to make those approvals. Then it seems like it's coming from a legitimate, especially if they're in the environment already. That's why I think the post compromise technique is so interesting here, in that it looks like it's coming from somebody trusted. The email looks trusted. It's just been compromised, and I think that's really the interesting point for me about this as well.
I feel like we're on a social engineering theme for this between phishing and this specifically. But It may not feel like a really sexy story to some, but it is to me because it's still super successful. It's happening every week. This is a really common attack. Um, and we kind of, I think we overlook these types of attack, but the impact of massive, $50,000 wire transfer coming from your accounting department, that's going to result in some consequences for sure, and
Yeah.
additional risk you have to report now.
Like even thinking about a brewery, about breweries in general, the theme of the show, obviously we're being in a bar talking about security. There was a brewery that is local to where I am a few years ago. This is exactly what happened to them. They were the victims of a business email compromise, and they were coerced into transferring millions of dollars to what was believed to be a trusted account. And so it's, for many businesses as well, that can be impacting in terms of that might be a death sentence. That might be the end of the business, right? If that happens. And that's something that is lurking in the environment. I think that is so pervasive and it's silently pervasive that I think there was a stat from Proofpoint that came out. It's 10% of breached Microsoft 365 accounts had malicious inbox rules that were created within seconds of initial access. So it shows you the persistence and how these are lurking in the environment and what you can do when you actually have access.
And depending on the type of organization you work for, I mean, if you're sitting at a really high profile industry, manufacturing, technology, government, right?
Right.
These types of persistence in email inboxes may not be in order to for monetization. We saw a lot of this for espionage,
Hmm.
a lot of it for discovering data. And when I think about some of these too, if they're like, okay, we can't get a wire transfer done, but they're still going to look at the type of data that's exposed that they could take, that they could, I mean, exfiltrate and then do an extortion only attack, threatening to leak it. Like I said, that once they've compromised an account and they have those stolen session tokens, who's to say they don't just say they're not successful on the email side, they're just going to pivot over to SharePoint and OneDrive and start pulling down data.
I think that's what's super interesting to me as well is that like we've talked about this. We know that attacks aren't specific points, right? They're paths and they move through the packs. I think it's really important that you need to be able to see the entire path to defend against this type of threat, especially because you mentioned like the technique is actually starting with the stolen credentials, right? A phishing email, et cetera, stealing those credentials. It's moving into the account takeover, realm, and then it starts to plant inbox rules specifically within seconds of the login. So it's doing that super fast. And that is difficult to detect, number one, if you're not looking for it, but also if you can't see that path, if you only just have an email, protection system, you can't see the entire, identity layer, credential theft, all of those, and it being able to pivot or move laterally into the environment. And that's what I think is interesting. You mentioned like now they're going to pivot into SharePoint and into other areas. And if you're considering an admin account, right? If you actually happen to gain access to an admin account and those rules that maybe were just applied at one, user or one inbox can now be applied across multiple mailboxes, the entire environment simultaneously, right? So now it's propagated and scaled across the organization, which seemed like maybe a harmless threat initially, but now it's the entire organization that's impacted.
Oh, yeah. Then you've got a nice little cloud incident response that you're going to have to perform.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, all right. So, I think what we'll do now is like I'm just looking at my watch here, and it's getting really close to closing time. So maybe Mac, let's serve up one more round with what everyone can take with them in their Uber when it arrives, and take back to. I know you missed your Uber Eats, so maybe this doesn't apply to you, but what can folks take back to their organizations to defend against some of these threats that we've talked about? Let's look at the defensive playbook and talk a little around what they can do.
Okay. PCP.
PCP.
Listen, Team PCP. Some people leave the bars, I'm sure, running from the cops. The most obvious ones that come to mind, but the things is looking for some of the TTPs related to VECT ransomware, which, by the way, are going to be a lot of ransomware based types of activities, from any sort of living off the land techniques, installation of legitimate services, changes in group policy, creation of scheduled tax, creation of other accounts, Anything administrative, privileged, account related that's doing weird things, all of that, right? These are things that you should already be looking for and monitoring for. The double extortion indicators, so obviously large outbound data transfers, as we mentioned, when you may or may not get an actual encryption event, it doesn't mean that, just like the case that I talked about in regards to the team's vishing, they were able to decrypt. That wasn't the problem, but their data was still posted on the payout kings. So always keep that in mind. Segmentation of networks, of course, immutable backups. I think largely a lot of these are coming back to the ransomware perspective of
Yeah.
Team PCP hooking up with VECT ransomware. So looking for those. And then, of course, monitoring like your actual CI/CD pipelines, some of the processes that go internally, the tools that are being used. This is a supply chain attack, so in many cases, it's like a 0 day on a tool that's automated and used by many developers. So that's kind of
Hmm.
the problem you can't avoid. There's not a lot of defense against that. However, there's post-exploitation defense mechanisms you can put in place. Teams vishing, this probably isn't going anywhere. I would argue since this is Teams abuse has been around for quite some time, like we talked about, different methodologies, it's only going to continue. So first and foremost, restricting Teams, the external access, looking at those settings, doing allow listing of who can do what, chats, calls, etc. And then the security awareness training evolution. And maybe it's just putting out communications to your end users, gathering all this information and saying, here's some intel to our end users. By the way, if you see this, that might be sus. So if you remember the email bombing, that's a good indicator where you should already know who to call on the IT support side, who to report on your internal security team, right? Like that process is surprisingly wasn't talked about. Um, if you see email bombing. However, it moves again 3 minutes from conversation to compromise. Just suspect if you are getting an immediate call or text from an external IT support help desk all lowercase, IT assistance. You can look at the blog. We wrote up an entire blog on this. I don't know if we'll drop that in the chat. Just type in Cynet Teams Vishing in Google. It's the first one that pops up. All of the IOCs we've collected. In addition, Microsoft does a great write-up. I think they have a little bit more IOCs, of course, because it's Microsoft. So look for some of those IOCs, but really it's the display names to look about. And then we talked, of course, on the remote access tools. So post compromise, compromise the account. They get quick assist as the most common one we're seeing right now. It's not the only one, so keep that in mind. Likely you're going to have some detection on the DLL side loading that's occurring, but really it's the backdoor malicious files being implanted, executed, and backdoor. So those are kind of common. What I would do is, again, look at managed application control type of solutions internally. Just look at what is considered normal use for your system administrators and your IT support. And I would say, I would argue like these are great opportunities when you see these hitting the news and they're more popular and things like Cynet talking about them because we are seeing it on the PSYOP side. Just last month, we had over 7+ cases,
Wow.
including the one I talked about. So like they are frequently happening every month, and it hasn't slowed down. But what I would argue is this is a time to do more internal business communications, which is ironic because we just talked about email inbox rules. But I would those type of communications of like, hey, just as a reminder, here's how our IT support process. Here's who our IT support people may be. Here's what's considered normal. We won't reach out to you unless XYZ, or you can reach us if you have these issues by this email. And so that way, if you haven't done the restriction of the team's external access for whatever reason, and can't note the labeling that this is an external account, then you can work on end user training and really shifting their mindset of what's considered normal. And they should be worried if they're getting the email bombing in the first place. And then,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome.
inbox rule abuse. I think, alerting on that typically happens. I'm not saying to go and audit all of your audit logs to do. that level, but you should have some sort of ITDR solution,
Yep.
MDR, right? Your security team should be monitoring for multi-events on the identity side, everything I had talked about. So, including those new inbox rules, mail delegation changes, all of those are weird usually. Obviously, people set up inbox rules all the time, but when it's paired in conjunction with other event types, that's usually what a good sign is that you've been compromised.
We talked about having coverage across multiple vectors as well. I think that the inbox rule abuse is a really good example because once that compromise happens and they start to move laterally, we talked about it earlier. It's like now how do you stop it? So it's really important to be able to correlate those logs, your log files, the data across multiple different systems so that you can get clear signal in order to respond and how you need to respond.
I like this grouping today. I like all these topics. They're light.
They're
It's like a
fun. They're light. I mean, they're still pervasive too. That's the other thing, right? Like they're happening. It's things that
yeah.
are happening. These are tactics that attackers are deploying.
I mean, minus Team PCP. Obviously, that's like CI/CD pipeline, compromised supply chain attack. That's a little bit more fancy, but keep
I'm
in
sure there's
mind,
developers that are, in the bar here today with us that are, they're interested in that absolutely.
hopefully they take it back to their team. They're like, hey, stop everything we're doing right now, said no developer ever.
Ever.
We're going to need to do a security audit again, no
Yeah,
developer.
that's what's going to happen. Well, great, Matt. Well, I'm looking around here and they've started to turn the lights on at my end of the bar. Yeah, I know the Ubers are on the way here. They're starting to play that song by Semisonic. What's it? I think you want to sing
Right.
it, don't
Oh,
you?
they are. Oh
Closing
no, look, they
time.
are turning off the lights. I think I gotta go
Oh
too.
no.
I might have to walk home.
Well,
Goodness.
you know what that means, right? I think now it's time for you to sing karaoke.
Oh, not closing time. No, I'm not going to. I'm definitely not. We were worried about copyright. And I didn't
Yeah.
want people to steal me from my day job to do so I don't want to do.
Well, that's great. Maybe on another episode we'll do some security karaoke. We'll think about how that works for security songs. But before Mac and I clock out for the day and close the doors on this month's Threat Intel briefing, want to make sure that you check out the blog post. We just linked to it that Mac was talking about in the inbox rule abuse blog post that we just had. It's really interesting. So check that out. Get some insight into what we're seeing in the wild and what Mac's team is seeing in the wild as well. And then this is kind of interesting, but might be contrary to what we've been talking about from like an inbox perspective, but definitely subscribe to our Stories from the SOC newsletter. This is something that's going to deliver this level of threat intelligence updates straight to your inbox. You'll get that directly. You don't have to set any rules. There's no inbox rule abuse here. It's just what we're seeing in general across the environments that we're protecting specifically, but also how you're able to see the path, and when you see the path, you can stop the attack. But for me, myself, Matt, for Mac, for everyone here at SignUp, thanks for joining today. We're gonna sign out for now and close the doors on another awesome threat intel briefing. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.